Hello, Houston. How are you? It's Mr. McKinney here at Mister McKinney Historic Houston. Excited for another show, our final show of the season of Live from the Heritage Society with Mr. McKinney. Thank you so much for joining us and being here this evening. We're excited to have you and more excited for our special guest because he's somebody who I've been waiting for to the end of our show. I wanted to end up with a bang, and we sure got one here with Douglas Weiskopf, who's going to be on the show very shortly. But of course, before we meet with Douglas, we want to make sure that we always talk with Allison Bell, our Executive Director for the Heritage Society, keeping us plugged into what's going on here at the Heritage Society. So, Allison Bell, come on down.
Hello. Thank you for being with us again.
Absolutely. It's our last show of the first season. Here we go.
I know, we made it.
And look at you, pretty in pink. I love that, too. It must be your favorite color. One of them, right?
One of them, yes. I'm the only girl in the family, even the dogs, so yeah.
Oh, my gosh. That's right. 2 boys and Chris Bell. Okay, I love it.
And 3 dogs.
Oh, look at that, look at that. Well, hey, so let's talk about what's going on at the Heritage Society. Of course, the big news is our big event happening. This is a really cool throwback to an event that we've had here for years. I mean, gosh, 55 plus years we had our Candlelight series.
Right,
but talk about this kind of revamp in a smaller, fun, safer way.
Sure, so we are excited to bring you the Candlelight Holiday Market, all outdoors in Connolly Plaza, Friday night, Saturday day, and Sunday. And you can get tickets to all 3 days. You can get it to 1 day. We have all kinds of vendors that we're excited to have. We felt like it was the time to help our vendors by being outside because so many of these shows have been shut down on the inside. So we're very excited about it.
Yeah, there's going to be some maybe theatrical elements as well. We're still evolving with this event, and vendors are actually calling us all the time saying, hey, do we have space? Which we can accommodate them. So if you know a vendor, or if you're sharing this video and watching it later on, of course, the event is happening on the 11th, 12th, and 13th.
Right.
So if you get a hold of us before then, please do so. Okay,
Yes,
so there it is, Candlelight Holiday Market, courtesy of our buddy, Courtesy Greg, right?
Greg,
Working hard.
our wonderful board member. And then we're going to have reenactors. Kian, one of our wonderful docents, has a team of reenactors that'll be on the porches, so you will still get to see the porches and the houses.
Nice.
But mostly our focus is on shopping and spending money.
And a little bit of history. And of course, you're celebrating and supporting the Heritage Society,
Absolutely.
which we've been around since 1954. And I want to also make a plug for year-end gifts. If you're thinking about making a donation, consider the Heritage Society because we've got matching opportunities coming up as well. So make sure you consider us when you're making that final gift if you're in a position to do so.
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's see what else we have coming up. Oh, our favorite.
Our favorite, our exhibit is still ongoing, of course. The women celebrating the 19th Amendment, the 100 years of women's right to vote. And it'll be here until next March. And in conjunction with that, we have a lecture series. And I failed to send Mr. McKinney the lecture series, but I want to tell you all about it. I wanted to send him the image. But tomorrow at noon, we have a live Zoom lecture series, and there are 2 wonderful women talking about women in and through the law and beyond. These 2 lawyers. One is a trial partner with Keen Miller. The other is Linda Brooks, and then Cecil on Hurd is with Shell. She's been there for over 18 years, I believe. And they both founded something called the Center for Women in Law. So they will be talking about that. They have a wonderful event coming up next spring, but they're going to be educating us tomorrow at noon. If you're interested, go to our website.
Go to the website, heritagesociety.org, for information about that lecture. I know Lisa Carey's really helping to promote that and put that on there as well. She also is the one responsible for this wonderful opportunity. Virtual tours. Talk about that.
Sure. So if you want to stay at your own home and not get out, you can follow our exhibit through our virtual tour online. It's only $5. You get to pull in, zoom into the panels, walk through, read each panel up close. You can see all the wonderful artifacts that we've collected for this exhibit that are on loan.
There's Julie Idison's dress.
Yes.
Yeah, on loan from the San Jacinto.
And the general store we found out was a polling location in Egypt, Texas. So there's a little ballot box in there and lots of things to see from the comfort of your own home.
Look at that. And of course, $5 we normally charge. So it's a nominal fee that does support the Heritage Society. So I thank you for doing that. And it's really great. Thank you, Lisa Carey.
Yes.
That's really great. You're doing that law focus on women because of that 1925 Texas Supreme Court scenario where you had Hortense Ward as our Chief Justice. So that's really exciting. You're going to learn so much about that with this exhibit. So do not miss out. Okay. Well, the part of who wants to see prizes. Here we go. Who are the winners from last week's talk? Once again, if you were with us last week, and for those who watched, Priscilla T. Graham's talk that we had here at the Heritage Society. I want to thank you for doing that, because if you stayed to the end, she had questions, 5 questions, and we'll have 5 questions again tonight. So Priscilla T. Graham had some good questions for us. There she is. And what are these questions?
Okay, the first question, what was Jack Yates' most famous, well-known profession? Okay.
Now, and the reason why it's most well-known, because he was a Renaissance man, a jack of all trades, if you will, had a lot of different opportunities that he was involved with in the community, but one he was most famous for was?
He was a pastor.
That's right, pastor. There you go. Okay, and who won?
This woman named Marcia Lutz.
Ah, Marcia Lutz won again. Okay, there you go.
We're starting a collection box for her.
She's got a library now.
Coming to pick it up at the shop, at the market.
Oh, great. She'll pick up more items, and she'll pick up these books.
That's
and
right.
She won. Well, great. Now, our second question was?
What is the name of the sergeant who's buried in College Park Cemetery who was part of the 1917 mutiny?
Ah, Priscilla T. Graham talked about this in detail, by the way, and it's in her book, by the way, her Camp Logan book, but also to other books as well. So what is the name of the other person?
His name is Sergeant Vida Henry.
Sergeant Vida Henry, there you go. Okay, and who's the winner?
Nobody.
Nobody got that. Wow, that's okay. That's okay. So you can always watch our past videos on YouTube, which we'll talk about, but there you go. Okay, how about our question number 3?
What is the name of the settlement that was settled by people from Louisiana? Oh, in the historic 5th Ward.
Yeah, so let's talk about this one. This was a fun question. Again, Priscilla T. Graham has a book that's all about the 5th Ward. She documents the 5th Ward in detail in that book, and you can get all these books available at PriscillaTGraham.com. But what's the answer to this?
The answer is Frenchtown.
Yes, Frenchtown. It has that historical marker there, by the way, and it's one of the places of pride in the 5th Ward. They really love to talk about Frenchtown. And who was our winner?
Sarah Haynes.
Sarah Westcott Haynes. Okay, she is the founding president for the McDaniel Cemetery, McDaniel Historic Cemetery, which is part of the Westcott Historic Cemetery Association, and she's actually going to be on our radio show December 3rd on 9.1 KPFT. But yes, she's a wonderful person focused on preserving the legacy of the families that are in that area by the Jensen and McDaniel's corridor. So, okay, well, who won?
Right.
She won. Okay, what about our next question? And 4th question.
What is the name of the theater in 5th Ward that was recently renovated? And you have a hint. It is on Lyons Avenue.
Okay, so there you go. Priscilla T. Graham talked about this once again. Once again, it is in the book that she has about 5th Ward. Okay, so go ahead and tell us what the answer is.
The answer is Deluxe.
The Deluxe Theater. Yeah, who got it right?
Someone named Betsy Gant Wittenmeyer.
Betsy Gant Wittenmeyer. Okay, so you're a winner. Okay, there you go. Okay, our 5th and final question.
What do the brick streets in Freedmanstown and the brick streets in Priscilla's hometown of Thomasville, Georgia, have in common?
Okay. What do the brick streets in Freedmanstown and brick streets in Priscilla's hometown of Thomasville, Georgia, have in common?
And the answer is the bricks point to safe places and businesses, which was an important lesson for us
absolutely.
to learn.
And Priscilla T. Graham talked about this in detail also when we talked about the Freedmanstown bricks that were there. So who got it right?
Nobody.
Wow, no one got it right. Okay, that's fine.
And there were a lot of people watching.
There sure were. She was really popular. People were chiming in.
She had a lot of friends.
They didn't have the courage to chime in. That's okay. Guess what? You can watch the videos and find the answers out for yourself. So stay tuned to this particular show that we're doing tonight, because there'll be a lot of great questions about the history of Houston trains.
Yes, and those who won, reach out to us. Either call us or send me an email so we can find out where you live, and maybe you can even swing by and pick up your prize. Okay?
Thank you, Allison Bell, Executive Director of the Heritage Society. We appreciate you being on. Okay, there you go. We also want to thank, by the way, and appreciate Kirksey Gregg for what he does for keeping us in this new studio space we're about to show you in a second, okay? And there he is, Kirksey Gregg Productions, LLC. Okay, well, here we go. We're going to start our show with our first guest on the show. Here we go. Let's see. Let me just see. We got some more business to take care of. Let me see what else we have over here. Thank you again. Thank you to everybody for being here and joining us on the show. We do appreciate you for tuning in. Let's see what we got going on. Okay, thank you again, by the way, to Priscilla T. Graham. We do appreciate her being on the show. There she is. She took us on a journey through African American history, unlike anybody else. Over 27 plus books about the topic, and we cannot thank her enough for sharing her knowledge with all of us here tonight. Last week, and of course, you can always check out the shows on YouTube, so make sure you check that out, all right? Okay. let's see. By the way, Season 2 kicks off Wednesday, February 24th, okay? 2021 at 7 p.m. right here. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back in February, so mark your calendars, February 24th, 2020, okay? All right. And if you missed last week's show, by the way, never fear with Priscilla T. Graham, because you can check it out on our YouTube page. Also, the show we have with Steve Curry, that show is also available on YouTube. And so is the Robert Sakowitz show. We had a lot of fun with Robert Sakowitz here in the studio, and that's going to be on the YouTube show as well. They're all available for you to check out. We do want to make sure that you like and follow us on YouTube. You can like and follow the Heritage Society. We only have, 200 plus subscribers, so we do need your help, okay? Let's see, and then when you do follow us on YouTube, there's lots of great videos that are on there. Videos about African American history, videos about architecture, videos about history in general. So it's all on our YouTube page. By the way, Douglas Weiskopf will be on the Houston Hour, the radio show I do every single week on 90.1 KPFT. So if you want to tune in tomorrow, that'd be great. 3 o'clock with my special guest co-host, Dr. Priscilla Bastida. There she is up on top. And it's called all about the rails around Houston, his book that he wrote. He's going to talk about that on the radio show as well, okay? So please tune in tomorrow, Thursday, on 90.1 KPFT to the Houston Hour with Mr. McKinney and Dr. Priscilla Bastida. And we always ask you like and follow our social media sites, Mr. McKinney's Historic Houston and the Houston History Bus on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So you can learn about Houston history, including the great things that we have, like our River Rose Christmas Light Tours that we're doing right now. We're doing River Rose Christmas Light Tours now until the 21st. And check out his book, by the way. Check out the book right here. Zoom in on that because we're getting really close and really excited to be able to have Douglas Weiskopf join us very shortly on the show, and that's happening very soon. But that's his book, Rails Around Houston, and of course the Houston History Bus. There we go too, okay? All right, let's see what else we got. Free tours that we do on board the bus as well. There it is. You can always call and text us, by the way, 713-364-8674. That is my cell phone. So any question you have about Houston history, or if you want to come ride the bus, give us a call, give us a text, and let us know, okay? All right. Lastly, where are we at now? We're getting close. Be sure, by the way, to watch Channel 11. Watch Channel 11 on Thanksgiving Day, 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. because it actually features the Heritage Society. We did a really good video here that I think is wonderful. Let me go ahead and there we go. How about that? Now you can hear me better. Be sure to watch, by the way, Channel 11 at 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. Thanksgiving Day Parade coverage is not going to be like it normally is with the actual parade, but they're going to be doing a really cool feature about the history of the parade. And I've had the pleasure of being one of the featured historians in the documentary, but we filmed it right here at the Heritage Society. So you'll see all this taking place on Thanksgiving morning on KHOU Channel 11 here at the Heritage Society. So 9 a.m. and 10 a.m., okay? All right. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, we want to make sure that we welcome the one and only Douglas Weiskopf. Come on out, sir. How are you? There he is. Thanks for joining us. Look at you. We got to talk about your gear. I'll let you have the mic. There you go. That's for you. Great to be here. Great to have you. So we want to welcome Douglas Weiskopf. He's, of course, the author of the book Rails Around Houston we talked about earlier. He's a librarian. He's a train historian and author we mentioned earlier. So, first and foremost, you're pretty recognizable. You've got this presence about you. You're a larger-than-life character. You remind me of somebody who you kind of embody. Let's talk about that for a second. People would recognize you probably from where?
Well, I appreciate that. I worked for over 30 years in the Texas room, the Houston Public Library, the Houston Metropolitan Research Center. Had just a wonderful time working there, introducing, my favorite thing I think was introducing school children to the joys of Houston and Texas history and of discovering it themselves by looking at the old books, looking at the old maps, doing research through the papers. It was just a lot of fun. I loved working.
Well, and I have the pleasure of being the president for the Friends of the Texas Room this year, and it is just a wonderful organization. What our board members do to help raise funds to continue the great work that y'all do with the collection over there, including George, by the way, who we're going to see some of his photos, right?
Yes, sure will.
So that kind of comes into the story a little later on, but thank you for the work that y'all do. That you did do there. Of course, you're now retired, and you're not just resting at home. Tell people what you're doing in your retirement days.
Well, if I couldn't work with Texas history, if I couldn't do that, then the next best thing was to help people discover the joys of owning trains and modeling trains and learning about trains. So I'm working in the only train store left in the city of Houston, Papa Ben's Train Place. just a little bit west of the medical center on Bel Air Boulevard, right where Stella Link, which gets its name from the rails in Houston because it was a link to a junction called Stella on the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. And I hope you can come in there. You can find my book there. Alan Perlman is the owner, brother of Ben Perlman, who many may recognize the name. He was a founder of N-Scale modelers. That's the little bitty trains that I tell people are too small for me because my fingers are too big. But they have a model railroad that once the COVID panic is over, we will be able to see their model railroad come in every Saturday and Sunday when the store is open and watch the model railroad being run. But you can go there any day during the week and see all of our model trains. We have every gauge from little bitty N-scale to great big garden railroading size, books about railroads, and we even have a rescued racing dog named Sonoma. So it's a lot of fun.
Look at that. I want to give you guys an update for who's tuning in, by the way. We've got with us Dr. Priscilla Bastida's tuning in. You're going to see on the radio show. Kim Kressenberg is tuning in. Barbara Witten is tuning in. Marsha Lutz is tuning in. Priscilla T. Graham. Thank you, Priscilla T. Graham, for all that you did last week. We had a great show thanks to your efforts. Rose Spalding. Phil Stewart, our buddy Phil Stewart, says hi. Dr. Gene Preuss says hi, by the way. So he told me that earlier to say hello to you. John Kelly Jr. says hello. He's watching with us. Faustine Lee is also joining us. So David Flores, all these great folks are tuning in to hear you. So thank you so much for doing that. Do us a quick favor. Give us a like, by the way. Hit that like button, that heart button. That lets us know that you're there. But it also creates the algorithms that allows Facebook to know to share this page with more people, okay? So we're looking forward to that. And of course, you're going to be able to chime in. Madeline and Karen, by the way, Karen's on board. You know Karen?
Yeah, I think I do.
Oh, look at that. So now, Douglas, tell people a little bit about you, because you grew up in Houston, right? What side of town did you grow up in?
I grew up on the east side. I was born in Jacinto City, Texas.
Wow, Frank Sharp did that, 1946.
That's right.
Yeah.
My dad was working at Inglewood Yard. He was a switchman, brakeman for the Southern Pacific Railroad, or as he would have told me, the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. The Inglewood Yard, just north of Interstate 10, where Wayside Boulevard crosses it. And I was living there, or I was born when he was working that night on the trains in Inglewood, and a cold front had just come through. My mom had baked pumpkin pies, and so I love trains, cold weather, and pumpkin pies. So I grew up. People ask me when I started liking trains, and I have to admit I don't remember. As long as I can remember, I was one of these kids that drives. There's a lot of parents out there who recognize this. When they come up to a railroad crossing and the lights start blinking, the kids want them to slow down, not speed up. I always wanted to catch the train so I could see the train going by. My favorite thing to do was to walk across the McReynolds Junior High fields and play on the railroad tracks, which I really don't advise children to do nowadays, but it was a lot of fun when I was young. So I've always loved learning about the trains. I got to know George Werner, who Mr. McKinney mentioned, when I was working and helping him do research in the Texas room. He knows more about Houston and Texas railroads than anyone I know. I used to tell him he needed to write a book about Houston railroads, and he kept saying, no, I don't like writing books, I like doing the research. So finally I decided that maybe it was time, if somebody was going to write a book, maybe I was the one that was going to do it. And so I approached Arcadia Publishing, and they were very helpful and reached out to me and guided me through the process, and it was a lot of fun putting it together.
Well, that is great, and Houston's better for it. We're all better for it. Make sure you go out there and get a copy. You can get it everywhere, by the way. Amazon. We've actually got some autographed copies that we're going to be giving out as prizes. So congratulations to the folks that answer questions towards the end. You won't learn if you want until February 24th.
Oh goodness!
No, we're going to let you know. But please make sure that you get a copy of the book. It's a great holiday gift.
Yes, it is.
What young person doesn't love trains? But they're going to learn about Houston history, and you're kind of like me. We would love to kind of sneak that history in as much as we can.
That's right.
So that's
and they can always come over to Papa Ben's and buy it there, and I'll sign it for them.
There you go. Get a photo. Get your copy, signed copy with Douglas Weiskopf himself. How great is that? How about that? I love it. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Let's take you through a journey through Houston's history by way of rail. Here we go. What are we looking at here?
I love this little picture here. This was from 1922. The Houston Chamber of Commerce promoted Houston as where 17 railroads met the sea. And in just a couple of years, when the Houston North Shore Line opened, there would be 18 railroads that met the sea. And for almost 50 years, from about the early 20s all the way into the late 50s, the Chamber of Commerce and other Houston entities would offer newspaper ads or radio commercials where they lauded the city where 18 railroads met the sea. This, of course, is the City of Houston seal, which dates back to 1840. It was designed by the then mayor of Houston, Francis Moore, who had it drawn and made for him, had it carved for him in New York City, brought it back, presented to the Chamber of Commerce, and they adopted it as the city seal. And that's a cute little locomotive. I know when we look at it, it looks old and quaint, but that was the ultimate in modern railroad technology when the seal was adopted. A 440 became the standard of railroads all across the United States and pulled passenger trains and freight trains for 50 years. And it's called a 440 because there are 4 wheels in the leading truck and 4 driving wheels, and then there are no wheels underneath the fireboxes. So that's why it's called a 440.
Like you mentioned earlier, I just love the fact that it shows that Houston's always been a forward-thinking city.
Yes,
since
exactly.
the very beginning, so people love that. And I love that you explained that because so many people know our city seal but don't know what's behind it and the history behind it, so I like that. Well, let's keep going. Talk about this.
This was the first locomotive in Houston, and looking at this cute little engine gives you an idea of how modern thinking the city fathers were, because they designed that seal a full 12 years before the first locomotive arrived in Texas. And this is more of an older antique engine than the locomotive on the city seal, because it just has 2 driving wheels. It was named the General Sherman. It was named for the gentleman that was second in command at the Battle of San Jacinto and was a promoter of early Texas railroads for several years before he finally put together the economics and the backing from Bostonian, mostly New England financiers, to build a railroad connecting the port on Buffalo Bayou to the cotton and sugar plantations and farms west of Houston. The railroad was called the Buffalo Bayou, Brazos, and Colorado Railway, and they brought down this little locomotive that they had bought secondhand in Boston. It was built by Baldwin Locomotive Works, but we don't know much more about it, and unfortunately it's not still in existence. And the locomotive was fired up, and the engine bell first rang on Christmas Eve in 1852.
Look at that. And of course, Sidney Sherman, people know him from his legacy you talked about earlier. You might know the Sidney Sherman Bridge, by the way, in the in the Port of Houston area on Loop 610, but that is great. So it all starts there. Now take us through this.
Well, there were a number of bridges on the Buffalo Bayou, Brazos, and Colorado Railroad as they built westward, but the biggest one and the most troublesome was the bridge over the Brazos River. It was only a few feet above the low water mark on the Brazos, and there were still riverboats that went up and down the Brazos. So they built the center section, a 50-foot long barge that they could move out of the way and let riverboats come by. So that because of that, the approach on both sides was very steep, and the trains had to build up a lot of speed to go down and go across and get back up the bank on the other side. Passengers were given the option of getting off and walking across instead of riding across, and there were 2 or 3 times when the train actually went in the Brazos and had to be fished out. By the time the Civil War began, there were about 470 miles of track in Texas, and almost all of them focused right here in Houston. The first one, the BBB&C, you can see kind of swirling its way from Harrisburg west. And the interesting thing about that is that that's where the port was. It was at Harrisburg, not downtown Houston, where the next port would be at the foot of Main Street. But all of these railroads centered around Houston. The only problem was that some of them were built to different gauges, and so you couldn't actually deliver a load of cotton or sugar plantation products from Alleyton or from Brenham all the way down to Galveston, because the gauges of the rail, that is the distance between the rails, changed. Now here is a picture of the first port of Houston, where the railroads met the sea. This is right downtown, the foot of Main Street on Buffalo Bayou. The bridge in the background is a little railroad bridge across White Oak Bayou. And if you happen to ride the Sunset Limited through Houston, you cross that bridge as the train is going east towards New Orleans.
Wow. So people that ride that train, the commuter line, have no idea that they're riding a rail that has been there since the 1870s.
That's 1850s. 1850s.
I mean, that's impressive. That's really interesting.
Not the same bridge, but the same location. By the time the Civil War was over, the railroads began building again. Texas wasn't damaged nearly as badly as most of the other southern states. And the first railroad to begin building after the war was over was the Houston and Texas Central. And it was the first railroad to reach other railroads outside the state of Texas. So they advertised that you could actually take a passenger train, a deluxe express train from Houston all the way to St. Louis. And it only took several hours to get from Houston to the Red River. It wasn't quite as fast as it is now, but when you think about the fact that before this, the fastest way to travel was only as fast as a horse could pull a stagecoach, this was quite an improvement. This beautiful advertisement is from a great book that's in the Texas and Local History Department, the Texas Room, that I borrowed with their permission.
And I want people to see what it was like being inside one of these trains.
Yeah.
So few people actually nowadays, I mean, have ever been inside of an actual train, ridden a
That's
train,
true.
and it's not as convenient as it used to be, and it's not as accessible as it used to be. I mean,
No.
I heard in some cases, like an Amtrak train might be on a train track for hours, while the freight trains get to go by.
Unfortunately,
obviously,
that's
which is
true.
priority.
Yeah.
But this is what they would have traveled in and what it was like. So it's actually pretty luxurious.
This was the ultimate in luxury. You can see on the left-hand side, the chairs have been folded down to make beds, and there was actually a bed on the upper level that you can see right behind the curtains. When bedtime came, a porter would come through, and he would very efficiently fold down the seats and then fold down the upper berths, fill them with bedding, and men and women both slept on the cars. I don't know exactly how they arranged the privacy aspect, but usually they would actually go just behind the curtains and undress, get ready for bed, and sleep there till the next morning. The next major railroad, there were several railroads that left Houston. The first one that built out of Galveston was the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe Railroad. As the Texas economy boomed in the 1870s, Galvestonians realized that they were being left out because all the shipments were going through Houston. So they built a railroad to purposefully bypass the city of Houston. They called it the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe, with the intention of building all the way up to Colorado and connecting with the Denver and Rio Grande. So they built west. They built through the little town of Rosenberg, where they crossed the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. That's a funny story in itself, because they wanted to go through Richmond, but Richmond wouldn't give them the property. And so they just built west of Richmond till they came to a place where they could cross the other railroad there, the Southern Pacific, or Texas and New Orleans, and they founded the town of Rosenberg, named for the Rosenberg family. Mr. Rosenberg was president of the railroad, the Rosenberg family in Galveston, and they continued to build up. The Santa Fe now goes up through Temple, and eventually met the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway to join with it. Here's an interesting little tidbit. Some of your listeners may remember, if you took a train from the Santa Fe train or the Amtrak Texas Chief from Houston to Chicago, you went through Rosenberg. I never could figure out why in the world you would go all the way down to Rosenberg to go north to Chicago. It's because when the Santa Fe built, they bypassed Houston. So their Santa Fe passenger trains had to go all the way down. They had to follow the Southern Pacific line to Rosenberg where they connected with the Santa Fe to go north to Chicago.
Look at that. Now, mystery solved. Explain. Okay.
The first transcontinental railroad through Houston was the Southern Pacific lines, the Texas and New Orleans Railway, and the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio Railway joined with Southern Pacific from California. The men who had built the Central Pacific Railroad from California east to Promontory also built the Southern Pacific Railroad, and they joined together with the Texas railroads, and they met at a little bridge over the Pecos River, just west of the Pecos River, where they drove the Silver Spike, completing the railroad in January of 1881.
And
Pardon me, 1883.
1883, yeah. But in speaking of that, so one of the reasons why, by the way, I want to do a little update for us. We got Stuart Black joining us. Thank you, Stuart. I think you're related to Kirby Black. I hope Kirby Black's joining us too. Yeah, you are, because we met at a party we had. Lisa Bunsey, my buddy Lisa Bunsey's chiming in. Donna Rosenstein is chiming in. Peter Bassell, thank you so much, Peter Bassell, for doing that too. Peggy Harris, Al Bundy.
Oh,
yeah, he's chiming in, your buddy. So lots
Maybe
of folks
Al
are
Dykes.
doing this.
Al Dykes?
Al Dykes?
Okay.
No, I don't think.
No? Okay.
Al, where you at, buddy? I'm telling you, Al's not here. No, Al's not here. Sorry. Okay, we got to get him
That's
on.
too bad.
But guess what? Thank you for doing this, by the way. Make sure you like the page, okay? That means a lot to us. Now, talk about why we picked the 18th for our show, too. What happened on November 18th? Same year, right? 1883? Let's talk about it.
1883. This is a very significant date because we don't think about it nowadays. If you look at your watch, you know that if you're going to someplace in Dallas, or you need to call somebody in Dallas, or say New Orleans, that it's going to be the same time there as it is here. But up until the 1880s, that wasn't the case. Every town had its own time standard. When it was noon in Dallas, it was noon in Dallas. And when it was noon in New Orleans, it was noon in New Orleans. But those times aren't the same because the sun's not directly overhead at the different locations. This proved to be a problem with the railroads when the railroads developed, because up until that time, the fastest you could go was by stagecoach, a few miles an hour. So if it took you 3 hours to get, say, from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, so what? I mean, there was very little difference in the time. But when the train started moving, then all the trains needed to be on the same schedule. The railroad solved this problem by following railroad time, and that meant that every railroad set all of their clocks and watches to the time at a certain place along that railroad. For the Pennsylvania Railroad, it was Pittsburgh. For the New York Central, it was New York City. But so if you had to travel someplace, you needed to figure out what time it was by a certain railroad's time. The railroads finally got together and realized this was a headache. And in 1883, they established the date. They divided the country up into 4 time zones, about 15 degrees wide, because that's how far the sun moves in about an hour. And they established the times for these 4 time zones. It took effect November 18, 1883. On November 18, 1883, they call it the day of 2 noons, because they set the time by the Naval Observatory, the National Observatory in Washington, D.C., for the Eastern Time District. So at noon, at the Naval Observatory, they send a telegraphic message all across the United States to the different towns. And so in New York City, they had their noon 4 minutes before noon in Washington, D.C. So all of her church bells chimed and everything at noon in New York City. Then the telegraphic message went out that it's noon again, and everybody chimed again. And they also dropped a time ball from the top of the Western Union building in New York City. That's where we get the time ball concept.
Look at that. You see, you're going to learn something new all the time at the Heritage Society. Thanks to Douglas Weiskopf. So real quick, let's take us into the Houston gems here. What is this gem that's no longer there? Talk about this space.
Sadly, this is the first Grand Central Station. This building was located right about where the Amtrak depot is now. This was a beautiful building built in the mid-1880s. I've looked and looked and looked. George and I both have looked and never found an exact date for the construction of this building, sadly. but it was built sometime in the 1880s and housed all of the Southern Pacific railroads, the Texas and New Orleans, the Houston and Texas Central, the Texas and New Orleans, and the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio, and the Houston East and West Texas Railways. A few other small railroads also had their trains here. This is a little map that shows the shops of the Southern Pacific Railroad, the Texas and New Orleans, Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio, just north of downtown Houston, the Hardy Street yards and shops. This was the largest employer in the city of Houston for several decades, from the late 1800s to the early, to say right around World War II. It was the largest employer in the city. This photograph was also made right behind Grand Central Station. We love the rodeo. That's a lot of fun, but what made Houston big was cotton. That was what was shipped through Houston. That was the thing that we made our money on, shipping through the port of Houston before the oil was discovered. So this photograph was made in 1894, showing what they claimed to be just an ordinary run of this, what the cotton trains brought in on a typical day. I kind of doubt that, but I think it was probably staged. But still, it's a great photo.
It's a Chamber of Commerce photo. I think you're right.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
I think you're right. Okay.
I love this one. These guys were the boiler crew. These were the men that built the boilers on these locomotives. That built the locomotives and worked on them in the Houston and Texas Central Railway shops, just west of the Hardy Street shops. You know where Houston Avenue is, just northwest of downtown. That's about where these were, and I love their dapper look. This was again to the Grand Central Station when they had built a train shed to protect you from the wind and rain in Houston in the bad weather. By 1890, there were 4 railroads radiating out of Houston all over the place. And a number of railroads, but many more than 4. But they used 4 different passenger stations. And this shows kind of an idea of how they needed to get things together, get a little better organized, and start focusing in on fewer stations.
I just divided the map in 2
That's
pieces
good.
so we can see both. So a little closer you can see the north section of the map, and we'll do the south section as well.
Yeah, just between White Oak Bayou and Buffalo Bayou there, you can see where the Houston and Texas Central shops were, and also where the Grand Central Station was. Just to the other side of White Oak Bayou is where the Missouri, Kansas, Texas Station will be. And let's see, south here you can see the International and Great Northern Station was to the east of downtown, right along Congress Avenue, just east of there. Right, it's very close to where the new stadium, well, not new anymore, for our soccer team is.
And this railroad here will impress people. This is a street or a road rather, that really kind of opened up Southwest Houston to people. Talk about this rail.
The San Antonio and Aransas Pass was another railroad that was actually built to compete with the Southern Pacific, but soon after it was built, SP took it over, and it came into Houston along a route that now is followed by West Park Street. And some of our listeners may remember when the railroad tracks went along West Park Street. And you're driving down Kirby or some of the other streets and cross West Park, you'll go over a little bump in the road. That's where the tracks were. And for many years, that was a railroad that came into town. And then when we built the West Park Tollway, there were many people who were really trying to get our transit system to adopt the railroad there and just follow the railroad tracks instead of building more concrete, but unfortunately that wasn't to be. I love this picture. This is one of my favorite pictures from the Texas room. These guys were trying to stay cool on an August afternoon in Houston as the Sunbeam, the Southern Pacific's crack passenger train, was about to leave for Dallas. They would leave here around noon and get into Dallas about 6 o'clock, which sounds like a long time, but for travel back then, that was very quick. This was the SP's premier train. This picture was taken in I believe 1924 was when that was taken.
Beautiful.
So the traffic was booming at our height. There were more than 60 trains a day that passed through Houston. You could get a train from Houston to almost any city in the country and down into Mexico. So in the late 20s, Southern Pacific decided they needed to get rid of that old red brick building and build something modern. They tore it down and they built Grand Central Station, beautiful art modern style. And it opened in 1934. It was the last passenger depot, last major depot to open in Texas. This was one of the trains that served it. This is my favorite train in Texas. This was the Sunbeam. It was a reincarnation of that earlier train that we saw. These locomotives are called Pacifics. They were 4-6-2s. That means they had 4 wheels in the leading truck, 6 wheels, and then 2 wheels under the firebox. And they were streamlined right there in the Hardy Street shops in Houston. They led the Sunbeam between Houston and Dallas every day, 265 miles in 265 minutes. The Katy Railroad, Missouri, Kansas, and Texas reached Houston in 1893, and they built their first depot just north of downtown, right off of White Oak Bayou. This was their first depot. The next depot was a bi-level affair. Well, Houston was building the Main Street Viaduct, and so they built a 2-level affair. You actually went into the depot on the 2nd floor and then went down to the 1st floor to catch your train. The building right behind it is the old Merchant and Manufacturer's Warehouse, which is now part of University of Houston downtown.
And the Jesse H. Jones Student Life Center is where this building is now.
Yes.
And it's really neat because I've interviewed older historians that actually remember this building being there prior to 1974, prior to when the university would end up moving there as well, and of course when they built that building. So that's really neat to be able to see this photo from this angle. So there you go.
This is an aerial view of Houston's Union Station that was built in 1911, and it shows the main building, the head house is what it was called, right there in the center. Some of you may recognize that now if you go to a ball game, because that's still there. It's a part of Minute Maid Park. To the left is, of course, Annunciation Catholic Church. To the right were the freight depots for the Houston Belton Terminal Railway.
And what's neat is you can see further on your left-hand side of the photo, you'll see residential, because
Yes.
in 1911, when they actually acquired the property to build this, they had to level something like 80 homes.
Yes.
To actually make this happen in 1911. And then I like this next photo because this is a photo of after 1912, because it took them a year. Only a year, and they ended up adding 2 more floors. So the original 1911 building only had 3 levels, and we covered this with our last speaker that we had a couple of months ago. Of course, Daniel Monsanto talked about that in detail when he showed the postcards. So it was really neat to show those then and now postcards, but here's a really great photo of the outside of the building. And again, it's part of the collection over at the HMRC.
That's right.
I'll move forward now. Take us inside.
This may look familiar to you too. This was the main waiting room at Houston Union Station. And I want to give a salute to the Houston Sports Association, because when they built Minute Maid Park, which I'm still kind of sore that we don't call it the ballpark at Union Station, but I understand money. When they built Minute Maid Park, they did a wonderful job of going in and restoring what the waiting room had looked like in its grand days. So it's a beautiful facility that's still open to visitors. You can still go in and see it. You can hold a public event there. It's very nice.
And I think for 20 years, since the 70s, this wasn't used. So there was a vacancy for that time. And they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to spend the money to renovate it and bring it to its prestige. And they did that really well. And more photos of the inside.
Yeah. This was when you left the main waiting room and went outside, then you would go to the concourse, where you went to just on the right-hand side where the tracks terminated. Union Station is what's called a terminal station. That is, the trains actually back into the station. They don't just stop there and then pull out and go on their way. You have to back in, and it's a little more complicated matter, but it's important because Houston considered itself important enough that we weren't just where this train stopped and then went on. This is where the people came to. We were a destination. Here's another photo from Union Station, probably around 1940, showing the the Sunbeam's main competition, the San Houston Zephyr, which was a train run by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad here in Texas. This lady and her little boy look like they're waiting to get on the train. Here is a more mundane, commonplace train. This is the Katy Railroad again. I love their trains because they kept them, as long as they operated them, they usually kept them in very good condition, cleaned up, shiny. I love the red locomotives and then the dark green passenger cars. This was the Bluebonnet, which was one of the local trains in Texas. The Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad, for most of its operations in Texas, didn't really try to compete with the streamlined first class limited trains. They provided more the commonplace travel from one small town to another. And the Bluebonnet's a good example of that. It left Houston and went all the way to Fort Worth, but it took several hours to get there because it stopped at just about every wide place in the road between Houston and Fort Worth. Here we are back at Grand Central Station, showing the Southern Pacific's or the Texas and New Orleans top of the line train through Texas. This was number one and number two, Sunset Limited. This train ran from New Orleans all the way to Los Angeles and then for a while to San Francisco. In the early 1950s, Southern Pacific spent a few $1 million to build new train sets, all streamlined, all beautiful, air-conditioned inside with a French Quarter dining room, decorated in blue, a Texas style club car, a cafe lounge car, and then the Ottoman dining room and the French Quarter lounge decorated in blue with stars in the ceiling. And you could ride this train, as I said, from Houston all the way to New Orleans or all the way to Los Angeles.
And we want to give you an update. Ron Cannon, thanks for joining. Ron just joined us on Facebook Live, so we appreciate that. Thanks, Ron, our buddy over there. Jim Atkins, Marie Bell, how about that? David Leva. So you've got some Michael Bloodworth's on. Your
Good.
buddy Michael Bloodworth, he's joining us, a former speaker, our very first guest. We got our first guest and our last guest here tuning in. So thank you so much for doing that. That matters to us that you do tune in, and make sure you hit that like button, okay? Well, let's keep on going. This is a great photo.
Here we have this, I like to call this one the Long Elegance. This is a Santa Fe passenger train called the California Special that arrived here early in the morning, and it's backing into Union Station. You can see the Gulf building in the background. You know, it's hard to find pictures of the Gulf building
With the
showing
lollipop.
the sign on top, showing the lollipop.
It was only around from like 1963 to like 1980 something. It wasn't around that long.
Not even that long, I don't think.
Yeah, it was a few years.
Just a few years.
Look at that.
And so I love this.
And I
picture
cross
for
that
reason.
intersection every now and then too.
Yeah,
It's
you
very
can
dangerous.
see-
It's just exposed. You know. Look at that.
Here we are back at Grand Central Station. Actually, this structure is the final Southern Pacific depot in Houston. By the time they opened Grand Central Station, a beautiful modern building, train travel was declining because the automobile was
30s,
competing,
yeah.
and pretty soon, and the Depression, and then pretty soon you would have the freeways and even airliners. So in 1959, the Southern Pacific decided to tear down their big passenger station and just replace it with something a little more utilitarian and stark. And so they built this thing. I like to call it an Amshack, but I can't really blame Amtrak for it. And they sold the property where the depot had been to the General Services Administration, where they built the post office that is now gone. So the more things change, the more they stay the same.
So Marsha Lutz is timing in. Marsha is saying, I rode the Sunset Limited from San Antonio to San Francisco in 1967.
Wow.
1976-77 when I was in college. Look at that. And Laura Woods, our awesome director of development, just joined us. Phil Stewart's chiming in by saying, when did the Sunbeam convert from steam to diesel?
About 1951, I believe.
Okay.
And they still use the steam engines even a few years after that.
Look at that.
This was our first streetcar line. The first streetcars in Houston and in most cities all across the United States were pulled by mules. Here's another little tidbit for everybody. Hopefully my wife Karen isn't the only person that's used the phrase come down with the epizootic. If you hear somebody mention the epizootic, it was a disease that affected horses. And in the mid 1870s, most of the horse, or about half of the horse population in the United States was wiped out by the epizootic. But mules were much more sturdy. They could walk longer. They were more obedient. They were, believe it or not, they were more docile than the horses. They didn't get frightened as easily. They could go longer without eating or drinking, so they were much more practical to pull a streetcar, or for that matter, to pull a stagecoach. All the westerns you see on TV, most of those stagecoaches were pulled by mules, not by those beautiful horses.
And what I love about your book, too, is it doesn't just cover trains. You're covering all kinds of rail.
Yes, all rail.
Including the trolleys. So talk about this photo.
In 1891, the streetcar lines began transferring over to electric lines. Yeah. And this is one of the very first electric streetcars going around the corner right there at the Rice Hotel.
There it is, Oscar Martin Carter.
We also had two interurban lines. That's a term that's probably more familiar to Easterners than to people out west or in Texas. But there was an interurban line, which just means a heavier weight, something like a streetcar, but heavier weight and sturdier, that ran on electricity. And we had one that ran from Galveston to Houston, called the Galveston-Houston Electric Line. Opened also in 1911 and began service from Union Station all the way down to Broadway. You could get down to Galveston in just a little over an hour, which back then was first line that was top of the line. Their motto was speed with safety. Here we see the Galveston Houston Bluebird car coming around the corner there by Union Station. They published a little magazine called The Tangent because they liked to brag that most of the line between Houston and Galveston was a straight line, a tangent, so they could go very quickly. The other major interurban line in Houston was what I like to call the blue collar line. It was the North Shore interurban that also ran from downtown Houston, right by Union Station, all the way to Baytown. If you drive east and cross crossing Greens Bayou, you'll see a railroad track that goes along the side. The line goes underneath the freeway. That was the line of the North Shore Interurban. It ran from the Humble Refinery in Baytown all the way to the east side of Houston, and there they joined the tracks of the streetcar line, followed Lyons Avenue all the way downtown.
Wow. And speaking of the Baytown area, let's talk about the Highlands over here.
Yes, this is the Highlands, which is about halfway between Baytown and Houston, right there on the San Jacinto River. And the developer of the line promoted the Highlands real estate area, and he built a little water tower. The first water system for the Highlands was the second story of that building right you see right behind the depot. They named some of the cars Highlands, North Shore. They had named them Highlands, Baytown, and I believe North Shore, and I don't remember what the other one was called. Here is the last car to run in 1947 or 1948, and the gentleman that I got some of these pictures from, Paul DeVerter, was kind enough to share his photographs with me. He actually took that picture.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. So this is 18 Railroads Meet the Sea. We had to break this up into 3 different slides,
good.
so it's a little easier for people to read. So talk about the 18 railroads and how they met the sea.
Alrighty. A kind of funny thing about that is that they didn't all actually go down to the sea. A few of them were actually just commuter lines and shipping or shunting lines. But these are part of what became the Southern Pacific Railroad. You've heard me talk a lot about the Texas and New Orleans and the Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio, or the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe. San Antonio, Aransas Pass. The reason for that is that Texas had a wonderful provision in our state constitution that unfortunately has been overthrown, that any railroad operating in Texas had to be headquartered in Texas. So you had the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. Anyone who worked for the Southern Pacific Railroad knew that they got their check not from the Southern Pacific, but from the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, because that's how they were organized here in Texas. But these railroads were all early railroads in Texas that became part of the Southern Pacific. The Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio began as the Buffalo, Bow, and Brazos, Colorado. Texas and New Orleans ran from Houston east to the border. These lines became part of the Missouri Pacific, which some of our listeners will remember as a major railroad line here. The International Great Northern, the Beaumont, Sour Lake, and Western, that goes up north over Lake Houston. The St. Louis, Brownsville, and Mexico went down to the Rio Grande Valley, and the Houston North Shore was the interurban line. And the Missouri, Kansas, and Texas, and the Galveston, Houston, Henderson, and the Houston Belt Internal. Burlington Northern Santa Fe was was built out of the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe, and the Burlington Rock Island. The Trinity and Brazos Valley and the Port Terminal, Galveston, Houston Electric are no longer in operation. They're no longer in existence.
This is just part of the legend that's going to come. So very soon you're going to see a map coming up, but this just gives you an idea of the colorful legends that we're going to see shortly. And there's the map.
Yeah. If you drive around the freeways in Houston, you will cross different railroad lines. One of my favorite things to remind people of, my wife complains about this, if you were in the car with me driving west on the Katy Freeway from downtown Houston, you actually crossed by the Southern Pacific Railroad 3 times. You'll cross it going west immediately, and then it'll cross the freeway again at T.C. Jester, and then when you get west of there, you'll cross it again because it went north and then turned south to get down to the old Galveston, Harrisburg, and San Antonio, the Buffalo, Bow, Brazos, and Colorado Railway.
And there's more of the legends. So again, this is part of his detailed PowerPoint, which is really, really neat. And what I love about a lot of these old rail lines is that some of them have become, wonderful trails. That really kind of connect the dots and let people know there used to be some history here. We see it in the Heights. We see it, the tap that goes north to south right there on the east side. So all these great railroads have a kind of a new life. I mean, sadly, it's not what it used to be. But there's a little bit of history there.
That's true.
Well, so we have to have our 5 questions now. We are about to be out of time, though, but real quick, now you get to ask, what's question number 1 for folks that are paying attention, watching the show from the entire time, the beginning? What's question number 1?
Number 1, what was the first railroad in Texas?
Okay, easy one. What was the first railroad in Texas? Okay, Douglas Weiskopf said it earlier at the beginning of the program. What was the first railroad chartered in Texas? Okay, next question number 2.
This one's a little harder, but also the first railroad in Texas. It didn't begin in Houston. It actually started at another little town in Texas. So where did it begin?
A very famous town, right? And it was burned down famously as well. And it was annexed by the city of Houston in 1927, so it was no more. But it was an independent city. People don't realize it was an independent city by itself before and even after. So the Republic of Texas. So there you go. What's the name of that town? It's a very famous town. Okay, question number 3.
Why, if you took a Santa Fe passenger train from Houston north, why did you go through Rosenberg?
Douglas Weiskopf talked about this earlier. Why did you have to go through Rosenberg? Okay, say the question one more time for people listening.
Yes. If you took a Santa Fe passenger train or the Amtrak train from Houston, say, to Chicago, why did you go through Rosenberg?
Okay. Question number 4, I believe, right? The 4th question? Okay, what's that 4th question? Maybe something with that railroad that takes us out to a town west of here that people often mistake it for a beautiful lady.
Yes. We've named a freeway after it. We've named a little town after it. And
but how about what's the name of the railroad?
Yes.
Yeah, or the actual. Let's ask that something around that area. I'll let you decide since you're the guest. But
let's give them the name of the town and let's see if they can give us the name of the railroad.
Okay.
Yeah. The name of the town is Katy. But what's the name of the railroad
that it's named after?
Yes.
Okay. That's the question. What's the name of the railroad that is named after the town Katy?
Right.
Okay.
That the town of Katy gets its name.
Correct. Okay, so there you go. That's the big question. Okay, now the fifth and final question. What's it going to be? This is a big one.
Ooh.
Last question, last show of the season, last guest, best topic. Okay.
What was the name of the train that it's my favorite one in Texas? I said it was the most beautiful passenger train in Texas, and it connected Houston and Dallas, 265 miles in 265 minutes. What was the name of that train?
Okay. We're all out of questions. Okay, thank you once again to Douglas Weiskopf, who joined us on the show, for sharing his knowledge. We really appreciate it. You're the last guest on the first show of the season, so anything else you want to add before we zoom on out?
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you letting me be here. Just remember, when you see those flashing lights, you think you can make it across the tracks. Those trains are moving a lot faster than you realize, and it's impossible for them to stop. So just slow down, watch the train go by, and remember, think about where it might have been able to take you.
There you go. Great advice. And now we have our phones nowadays, right? So answer a couple emails, say hi to some friends, make a phone call, but don't try to run that train, because only one person's going to win.
That's right.
You know? Oh, gosh. Okay, all right. Take care, Houston. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to once again tell you that we are going to be on the show again on the 24th coming up. A big thank you, by the way, to you. Thank you to Isaac Sarabia, Harrison Funches, Kian Harden. Also, we have with us Minette Basel and Allison Bell for the Heritage Society, and Alana, who does our questions for us, too. We'll be back once again February 24th, 2021, so stay tuned. Got some great guests lined up. We're already talking to them. We're so excited to be on the show, so you do not want to miss out. Thank you again, and good night. Take care.